The Hebrew language, in my opinion, is the most powerfully dynamic language in the earth. I believe it's the language of creation. I did quite a bit of study, and that doesn't mean that I'm without error. But the first book that I wrote was the Rainbow Language, the sight, sound, and color of the Holy Tongue. And looking at that, it's my opinion that everything you have in what we consider the quote unquote scriptures today was originally in Hebrew. When you look at the New Testament, there's some hebraic phrases that just simply could not have been translated properly in the King James English or what they call the Greek or the Latin. And so it's my opinion that everything was written originally in the Hebrew language. And having said that, because we try to look at some English translations or whatever particular translation you may have at your hand, it often results in what I call the mistranslations. And I believe a lot of them are deliberate simply because there's a bias out there regarding some of the things that we're looking at and studying today, in particular, the calendar. And so having looked at that, linguists note that each word is reckoned, and listen to me carefully here, after what it does, not how it looks. And so in the Hebrew scriptures, and every model that follows the pattern of the Hebrew scriptures, those entities or whatever's referenced by a specific name is reckoned solely after their behavior, not their appearance. And so from a Hebraic perspective, again, an entity is a behavior, not that which executes behavior. And so nouns, even though it's the name of a person, place, or thing, it's actually called that or named that because it's executing a specific behavior, if that makes sense to you. Just like my name, David. If you go back and study the Hebraic origins of the name David, it actually indicates a beloved, one who is a lover. And so all Hebrew nouns have their origin in their verbal counterpart. And that's why I was looking at the word day or yom that we look at in Genesis chapter 1, which is extremely integral to our understanding of the day start, because a lot of individuals out there that adhere to the Enoch calendar, the Zadok calendar, they believe that the day started in Genesis 1:14, and the sun and moon was created there, and so that initiated a quote unquote day start for them. But Genesis chapter 1 begins expressing the idea that, and you have to go back and look at the context, it supplies an action where Yahweh later divides the light from the darkness, and he calls the day, or that light portion, day or yom. And you have to ask yourself why. And it's because light was expressed or demonstrated at that particular time. And so I'm going to take just a second and examine the word for light. And you're probably familiar with it. It's the Hebrew word or. And it's usually, if you look at any of your biblical concordances, it's rendered luminaries, to be or to become light, to shine. But if you go back and look at it from a scientific standpoint and or from a biblical standpoint, light is a mystery. And without doubt, both physically and spiritually, light is a wave or a frequency. And if you look at it in context, it was released, that wave or that frequency was released with or upon the breath that's released out of Elohim, as you see there in Genesis 1 verse 3, which says, and Elohim said, let there be light, and there was light. And if you follow that, what you have here is something that I believe Tim will really enjoy, is that you have a continuation of what we call an original seeding process. When Yahweh released the seed of his word, which I believe word and light, breath, they were synonymous. And so Elohim in Genesis 1:1, he seeds the heavens and the earth by the very same light that you see there in verse 3 when he says, let there be light. And it's interesting because if you study what the Jewish sages have to say, they also equate this same light that you see there in Genesis 1:3 with what they refer to as the divine emanations of the Creator. And so that actually carries with it a euphemistic term, which can indicate the ability to release seed, the emanation from him to procreate. And so when you look at that, you can also understand that the physical body seed of Elohim became personified in what we know as his son, the Messiah Yeshua, who was referred to both as the Word and the light of the world. And when you go back and read John, when John refers to him as the light of the world and says in the beginning, he actually is referring you back to the Genesis account. And he says that the Word was with Elohim. Without him, nothing was made. If you understand the mindset at that particular time, the Jewish sages of Yeshua's days were extremely familiar with this being that John is likening Yeshua unto. They did not acknowledge Yeshua as this being that's referred to in their written text all the way back to the Genesis account, but they actually referred to him as the quote unquote Memra. And I'll share a verse with from their Targums, and they called him the manifest presence. And here's one of their verses. Actually, it's a commentary on Genesis 1, verse 1 through 3, Targum Neophiti. And it says, from the beginning, the wisdom, the Memra, word of the Lord, created and perfected the heavens and the earth. And the Memra, the word of the Lord, said, let there be light. And there was light by his Memra, the word. And so word is synonymous with light and vice versa. And so this is what I believe John is doing. He's carrying you back to the Genesis account, and he's establishing this seeding pattern. And so if we can go back and look at that phrase in Genesis 1, verse 3, where it says, let there be light, ve yehi or, go back and if you want to look at a real interesting comparison, look at Robert Young's 1862 literal translation. And he has it, let light be, and light is. The interesting thing about his translation is that it allows us the understanding that there was an absent word that's not actually inserted there, but that absent word is the word here, indicating a place, implying that light already existed elsewhere. You hear what I just said? As originally intended in verse 1, in the beginning, light existed elsewhere. And so even when you get in verse 3, when you find that there was a tohu vabohu situation, a waste and desolate situation, and he says, let light be, he's actually commanding light to be here in a specific place after that incident. Light had already existed. Does that make sense to you? Now, if you, again, look at these words in the Hebrew language and keep them within context, because that's the key, I believe, to understanding anything that you want to extract from the scripture. You've got to take it in the context to read the entire surrounding events regarding what you're trying to grasp, because if you can take it out of context and have a little sound bite, and then you have mistranslation issues. But when you look at verse 3, when it says, and Elohim said, that word there is amar. There are two primary words that are used for speaking the word. It's amar and dabar. Amar, to say or to speak, actually reflects the act of speaking, not the entire message. And it implies the idea of setting things in motion or giving them a proper order, but it doesn't necessarily give an overall explanation of their duties and responsibilities as it relates to what has been set into motion. When you see something's responsibilities and their duties being established, it's usually ensconced in the meaning of the word dabar, okay? And it's also worth noting, if you just take a little sidebar and look at another word that you're probably familiar with, if we haven't been too long having celebrated the counting of the Omer leading up to Shavuot, well, that word Omer comes from the same root as this word Amar. And it's interesting because Omer is spelt with an ayin, whereas Amar, to speak or to say, is written with an aleph. Both of those letters are silent letters, and they're interchangeable. Omer as in the counting of the omer, is defined as a sheaf or a bundle of grain, and the purpose of that is twofold. It's either for planting or for consumption. And when you compare the two, the word omer, this is pretty powerful. It also carries with it the idea of something being subjugated, something being caused to be made a servant or to master. And having said that, we need to be very careful to master our words and subjugate all of our words to the spirit, not the flesh. Why is that important? How many of you have had people say things to you before and they'll say, oh, I didn't mean that. But yet the scripture tells us out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth will speak. Words that come out of our mouth are not accident. Words are seed. They contain the ability to be released into the earth, and they're planted and they're going to produce a harvest, or you're going to consume those words. And so we need to be extremely careful, because words are what give us the ability to be like the character of Elohim, if that makes sense. And now, having said that, you have to also remember that Adam, which includes both man and woman, just like you and I are created in the image of the Adam in his fallen nature. Adam was created in the image of Elohim. They were breathed into existence as seed containers. You and I, especially if we're believers, we are seed containers. So what is seed? Your word is seed. Word and seed are also synonymous with light. So if that's the case, you have to go back and look at the same thing we were just talking about there in John and in Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, Yahweh creates the heavens and the earth. We know that the word was there from the very beginning. And so if the word was there from the very beginning, and word and light and seed are synonymous, then I have to acknowledge that light was there from the very beginning. And so that word, that seed, that light of Elohim that was there at the initiation of creation was later given a physical body. And we called him now Yeshua. He was made flesh in the earth. Well, it's interesting because the same thing is said regarding Adam. There's a pattern here. Yahweh just does not do things by accidents or coincidence. He follows patterns. They're cyclical and they're Shene. I love that word. When I heard Tim first talk about that word Shene, I had to go back and look at it from the original Hebraic perspective, and it indicates that you're duplicating or replicating an exact copy. And so that's why this calendar is so important. And I followed the patterns in the heavens for years and wrote the book Ezekiel's Wheel, and I could not fathom how we could adhere to a 360-day pattern within the confines of a 365-day year until they explained to me about marking the shadow. And when I saw that, it would not matter if you had a 400-day year, you could still mark the shadows and still be within the confines of the biblical precepts of that Shene that Abba had established from Genesis chapter 1. And when I saw that, it completely changed everything that I had ever considered regarding that. And so when you go back again and look at the pattern of Yeshua, if Yeshua was given up, if he was the light, if he was the word, if he was the seed, he's given a fleshly body. John calls him the light of the world. And later we're told you are also children of the light. Okay. If I'm children of the light, that means that my father was light. Does that make sense? And so it's my contention that the specific body type that Adam and Eve were originally given would have been such that they would have been garmented, if you will, or shrouded literally in the same kind of light that was breathed out of Elohim into creation. And so let's look, if you will, at Genesis 2, verse 7. And Elohim formed man of the dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. The word for breathed here is the word nafach. And if you go back and study what John Parkhurst has to say regarding this noon pay root, it actually indicates that which is stretched out as an extension. And so when he breathes into the Adam, he's actually stretching himself. Adam becomes literally an extension of himself, just like my children. My children, when people say, well, he looks like his daddy, he looks like his mother, whatever, it's because they're an extension of who I am. Again, hopefully that makes sense. But another interesting thing I found in researching this word nefak, John Parkhurst says that this word for breathing here was originally, based on historical data, that it was originally likened or connected to a specific time of the day called the dawn, when right at the dawn of the day, the wind that had been laying down at night, the wind begins to stir. And so at the dawn, you have what's called the breath of the day, the breathing of the day released into the earth. And it sets the day or the light into motion. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Dawn was called the breathing of the day. And it follows the very same pattern that you see Yahweh initiating there in the Genesis account. Now, look at that word or phrase, and he breathed into him the breath of life. It actually comes from a plural phrase, nishmot chaim. And if you translate it properly, it indicates that instead of what we just read, and he breathed in him the breath of life, it actually indicates that he breathed into him the breaths, plural, a continuing breath, and the breaths of lives, indicating that not only did he breathe into him the ability to become like the Creator, but he set into motion into this Adam the capacity for this Adam to continue to respirate and to create with the same breath that Elohim himself had. Adam himself was an extension of the Creator, and he was put here in the earth as the Melchizedek priest, in my opinion, to orchestrate everything in the earth and its relationship to the pattern that would have been set into the heavens, and to do the very same thing that the Creator had to create with the very breath that had been imbued in him as Yahweh initiates that. Now look at the word for living here. It's the word chai, and it's translated as to continue to life, to sustain life, to preserve life, to be alive. But I noticed that it has the same root as the word for Eve, Adam and Chavah. When Adam calls his wife's name Chavah, she's initially referred to as the woman. She's called the Isha. But in Genesis 3, after the fall, she's called Chavah. Chavah is translated normally as to reveal, to declare, to make known. Why is that important? Well, after the fall, their physical bodies change, their physiology changes. And so instead of being able to reproduce by speaking that word, seed has to be planted physically inside the woman. And then what does she do? She produces an image in the likeness of her husband. And so what happens here is that I was showing you the very same pattern. It's just in a different realm, if that makes sense. Now, the idea that's conveyed here in this word chavah is that Adam and Eve are given a distinctive ability that was peculiar to Elohim himself. Adam and Eve were given the ability to amar, to set things into motion or set things in their proper order by breathing out life, light, word, and creating. In other words, they were charged with breathing out or speaking, with the result being that what they had spoken or would speak, that it would become a creative organ, and it would duplicate or replicate what had been shown by that very same breath. And that's why I believe that as Abba is restoring you and I in particular to these divine appointments, and to the Hebrew language. And Zephaniah 3:9 talks about the restoration of the holy language. I believe that he's given us an opportunity in the days that's in front of us to begin to replicate what we were intended to do from Genesis 1, 2, 3 forward. I believe that you're going to begin to see creative miracles, supernatural demonstrations of his majesty and his power as his people begin to release his word like we have never seen since our Messiah Yeshua walked this earth. And I'm excited about that. And I thought, while I was looking at this word chai and its relation to chavah, it was also interesting that chavah carries with it the original idea of a tent. The woman would literally be a tent. When her abdomen becomes distended, she is pregnant. The word pregnant there, hara, the original word har indicates a mountain. Her abdomen becomes distended. If you look at it, it's literally, it would form almost a 300, and if you could see inside like you can see on the outside, it would be, I believe it would be a 360-degree tabernacle or a tent following the pattern of the 360-day cyclical year that Abba has demonstrated from Genesis 1 forward. And it indicates that there is a constant returning, as in the cycle of sowing and reaping. That's what's so important. We don't understand that. We plant seed and then we reap a harvest. There's an interval in between while we watch over it and guard it and pull the weeds out and water it. But what we don't understand, that this is a cycle. Sowing and reaping is a promise of a return. Every time I plant something, I know that I'm going to have a harvest. And what am I going to do with the harvest? I'm going to save the seed and plant again. So it's cyclical in nature, and it's implying, I believe, that life is part of that pattern that we saw in the cyclical heavens or the luminaries to begin with. Now let's look at where Adam becomes a living soul. This again was a powerful word, and I've looked at it a million times. It's the word nephesh, and it's translated as to breathe. And so if you look at it, Adam was created to be a breathing soul, a breathing breather, if that makes sense. Now that may be kind of overly simplifying it, but what was the purpose of my breathing? Is it just to respirate, to keep the oxygen flowing and the carbon dioxide moving out? Or was it implying something even more profound and deeper, that I have been given a supernatural ability to inhale and receive the breath of Yahweh, breath, word, seed, or light? So I'm convinced that when I inhale, I'm literally respirating the light, the word of Yahweh. And when I exhale, what is stored on the inside of me should be in the image of what was inhaled or as I'm respirating. Does that make sense to you? And so the word nephesh here, we're told, let me read for you Leviticus 17:11, another word you're familiar with. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your soul, for it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. Now listen to this. If you look at the root word, that word nephesh, it becomes apparent then that the nephesh resides in the blood. The word blood here is dam. The numeric value of that word dam is 44, the same as the Hebrew word mod, which is a word for garment. So there's again a connection to the idea that Adam was originally garmented with a pure light. After the fall, something changes physiologically regarding that particular garment. Now, if you look at that word Adam, remember what we studied at the beginning. Every noun, Adam is a noun, but it comes from, it's a verbal root. And so I have to ask myself, if my name is Adam, what am I intended to do? If you look at the way that it's written, Aleph, Dam, the Aleph as a prefix indicates I. In other words, this I becomes the source of what is about to be spoken. In this instance, the source was Yahweh Elohim. He is saying, I am going to dom you. Now, the Dalet Mem root, though it's often translated as blood, it's interesting. It still conveys the idea, because you can see it in the word, the root of the word for resemble, the image, likeness, and that's what it actually conveys. The Dalet Mem root conveys the idea of to resemble, to be made equitable, equal, to put on the same level so that you could be compared with the original. And if that's the case, and the Adam was put on a comparable level, thus made to resemble Elohim, Elohim being the one that epitomized light, for he is, you can't argue with that, he is light, then the Adam has to, of necessity, be filled with, be a garment of.
Pastor John, I accidentally muted you. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. If you look at, let me back up and catch that word Adam again.
Good.
The Dalet Mem root in Adam, and this is the Aleph, indicating Yahweh as the source of what is being spoken, about to be released. He is saying, I will, regarding this entity that he's about to create and name. He's given the name because he is going to supply the same action that's being revealed in the verb's action as Abba's releasing it. And so he's saying, I will dom you. Well, when you look at it, it seems as if he's saying, I will blood you, because that's what dom is usually translated at. But if you continue to understand the Dalet Mem root conveys the idea of being made to resemble, to become equal, to be put on the same level, or to be comparable to. And so with that being said, when Abba names the Adam is literally made to resemble Elohim. How does he resemble him? In bodily form? Elohim had no form at that time. He is omnipresent, if you will. And so the way that he resembles him is how he breathes in and out, how he respirates, how he speaks, how he creates. And so again, if you look at that word that was chosen, the word nephesh, translated as both life and soul in several different examples, it carries with it the idea of being strong, increasing, spreading, to be dispersed. But it also, this blew my mind, it has a secondary base meaning in this word nephesh of rest. And so as he's calling him Adam, he's insinuating that this Adam, as he's able to breathe out, respirate, speak things into existence, to create, that there's something about this creative power and ability that this Adam has that is connected to the Shabbat. And it's my contention that the Sabbath rest is the single most powerful appointment that carries with it the ability, allowing us to be refilled, filled again, illuminated with that original light source. Now, if you go back and look at Leviticus chapter 23, when Yahweh talks about my feast, these are my feast, my holy convocations, the Sabbath is mentioned there. And if you look at the other holy convocations that's delineated, knowing and understanding that they're set on a 360-day calendar cycle. And so I would submit, if you miss the appointment, just like if you celebrate the Sabbath on the wrong day, or if you celebrate any of the other holy convocations on the wrong day or at the wrong time, then you've missed the ability to be filled, refilled, or illuminated properly. But if you make it there, at the divine appointment and you have an encounter with him because these are his appointments, doesn't it seem that this is a rehearsal of Genesis chapter 2, verse 7? When he's brought you here on the Shabbat, he brings you there at Pesach, Feast of Unleavened Bread, Shavuot, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Sukkot. He brings you there for an express purpose as you're being formed in his image to breathe into you the continuing life that follows the same pattern of Genesis chapter 2. That's mind-staggering. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what was the commandment, the first charge given to Adam and Eve? And I know you're familiar with it in Genesis chapter 1, 26 through 28. They are commanded to be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion. But if you look at it within the context of the words it's used, it's telling us that their efforts as it relates to being fruitful, multiplying, replenish, subduing, and have dominion, that their efforts are going to have to be confined to the very same parameters or boundaries, if you will, that would relate to the demonstrative efforts of Elohim at the instance that creation was set into motion. He would not tell us to do something that he hadn't done himself. He would not tell us to do something that we were incapable of doing. And so when he tells Adam and Eve to be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion, he's telling them that they're going to have to verbally release into the atmosphere, if you will, the words, the seed necessary for them to be fruitful, to multiply, which is a result of being fruitful, to replenish, which is, again, a multiplication. It's indicating a cycle. When you replenish something, you're going back again, refilling what had been an original. So it's, again, cyclical. And then that subdue and have dominion indicates that there was something here in the earth at that time that was necessary for them to exercise dominion over and to subdue. And again, it's indicating that by the word that would be released out of their mouth, those things would be accomplished. How do I deal with the circumstances in my life today that need to be subdued and have dominion? I can try and take physical control over it. Most of the times that's a failure. It's by speaking the word of faith, calling those things that be not as though they were. And I believe the only way I can liken it was back looking at the old Star Trek series years ago when they had the transporter and Scotty would beam them from one location to the other. They would move from one place, one physical location to another physical location. And I believe that that's what Abba's word does. When we speak his word in faith, it takes things that have been put in a bank account in the spirit realm and then moves them out of the spirit realm and causes them to become manifest in the natural realm. I believe we still have that ability today. I believe by and large it's been untapped and very few people are walking in it. But I submit to you that I am convinced that you guys have discovered a key regarding Abba's calendar that is going to help supercharge the individuals that are being restored to the Sabbath, the holy convocations, and the language of the Creator. And so I'm convinced that
Pastor John, I did it again. Sorry, I'm letting people in and it changes quickly and I muted you. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I believe that the purpose of the creation of the Adam was so that they could follow the very same pattern of Elohim and seed the earth, increase it, spread, disseminate it by doing one thing. And it may seem very profound. It's just simply and obediently speaking his word, releasing his light, and instantly light is here. That's the pattern. When he says, let there be light, one of the words that's insinuated as being there, but was not in the original text, it was let light be here, indicating that light was other places. But when he says, let it be here, it's here now. So when I say, let there be, and there's a there's a specific need in my life, and I release that word according, it's as if I said, let there be whatever that need is here now. And I believe that that's what Abba's moving us to as we speak. Now, kind of might seem far-fetched, but what does science say about the scriptural premise that I've been trying to share with you guys? Light is defined and measured by frequencies or waves. And there are far more light frequencies that are beyond our range of vision than what we actually see. Though I believe it's just like what Hebrews 11:1 says. The substance of things hoped for. The words that we have that he's given us, they're the substance of things hoped for. And they're the evidence of things not seen yet. Not seen yet. And so I had to ask, is it possible that those frequencies that are beyond our ability right now, our current range of vision, is it possible that when we speak them, that we have the ability to transport them into the physical realm? And in addition to that, science has proven that if light's frequency is slowed down, that it congeals or thickens. And that's why we have the word plasma, which is the fourth state of matter. You have plasma in our blood. You have plasma televisions. And I've put you a link there where you can go back and look at it, and you can do some research on your own. It's my opinion, and science confirms that, because I'm not that much of a scholar. It's just from what I've been able to read and to glean from the word. Science acknowledges that all matter is congealed light. In other words, light is revealed in energy waves or frequencies, and that's what allows our cells to communicate inside of everything that's in the earth that has living cells in it. It communicates with what's called biophotons. Now, it's my opinion that though the Adam was originally created as a speaking soul with the ability to release the light of Yahweh's word into the earth, that after Genesis chapter 3 forward, Adam's sin caused much of the original DNA light strands to be lost. Those light strands being the full capacity of Elohim's light that had been inside of us. And most scholars today acknowledge that only 3% of our DNA is active. 97% of our DNA is considered inactive or dormant, but they also freely acknowledge that it's encoded, but they cannot explain why it's in a dormant state. And so, again, I'll give you an example. Russian scientists, when we're working on the Human Genome Project, found that language and syntax could be found, language and syntax, the ability to communicate, could be found within the supposed lost 97% of our DNA. And the interesting thing about it is that even though they couldn't understand why it had been lost or why it was lying dormant, they found that it could actually be changed and re-encoded by frequencies, sounds, and even words with a laser light beam. And also, recent research has confirmed that this same quote unquote 97% of our dormant DNA, that it has triggers or switches inside of it that can be turned on and off, like things that take place in the environment. Words. That's why we have to be careful with the words we speak, because those words are seed. You can turn on, you can turn off. Now, when you consider that, they have the ability to either turn on genetic abilities or cause those same genetic abilities to become genetic anomalies or genetic weaknesses. We can be, as we speak his word, we can be conformed to the image of Elohim, beings that are transfigured because of the light of the creation inside of us, because science acknowledges that our DNA has the capacity to be resequenced. That's scripture. Yahweh's word heals. Yahweh's word brings life. And so we can understand that from a scriptural perspective, but when we start hearing it from a scientific perspective, you mean that the words that I speak, if I'm not careful, that they can affect the health of myself, but also the health and the life of other people? I spent some time ministering in Ghana, West Africa, and we dealt with some fetish priests there that had some powerful ability. And the locals were terrified because they had the ability to literally speak curses, and people died as a result of that curse. You can say, well, it's because they were so traumatized and they believe it. Whatever the result was, the end result was that they died from it. And words have the ability to do just that. And so I'm convinced that the reason we see such a prevalence of electromagnetic frequencies, everything we touch, we're right now, you and I are being seeded by these frequencies as we sit in front of these computers. And so we have to choose what seed we allow in. We have to qualify the seed that we allow in, the same as what comes out of our mouth. Now, I believe that the sole purpose of all of these things that have been released in the earth by the quote unquote powers that be is to continue to massage the human genome, if you will, to keep us from being able to become the quote unquote body of Messiah collectively, to keep us from being able to walk in the light as he is light. He told us we're children of the light, walk in the light. I believe we have that power. It might be dormant in us for a season, but I believe that it has been dormant and reserved for the day that you and I have been privileged to see. And I don't think it's an accident that all of these things are happening simultaneously. Abba's body's being raised up. His people are being imbued with the power that we have not seen. There's never been a time in created history where mankind as a whole has the collective ability to do what you and I are doing right now. Never. And it's just, it blows my mind. If you want to look at some further studies, there's a field of study called epigenetics, and it shows that not only can DNA be changed, but those changes can be passed on to the succeeding generations. And it's interesting because science now is confirming what Yahweh said, that I will cause the sins of the fathers to be visited to the third and the fourth generation. Why? I'm convinced that it has everything to do with words that were spoken, words that have been received. And again, this is confirmed, in my opinion, in Genesis chapter 3. I want you to notice this, because after the fall, you see, it's kind of almost like an innocuous statement made. I will clothe Adam and Eve with a garment of skin. The phrase that's used there is ketunet, or garment of skin. Ketunet is an interesting word because it's the same word that was used regarding the cloak that was given to Joseph. Ketunet passing, a garment of quote unquote many colors. I believe that it was a garment of light. Light has every one of the 7 primary colors of the prism there. Now, here you have the iron used rather than the olive. Remember, we looked at the word for light earlier that had the aleph, vav, resh. Here, that same phonetically vocalized word, or it's written with an iron rather than an olive. It's a word play. They originally had a ketunet, or a garment of light. Now, because of light being slowed down, this garment is changed to a ketunet, or a garment of skin. See that? Now, it is my opinion that prior to the fall, they had the ability to release light in that same let there be light here fashion that Yahweh did in Genesis chapter 1 forward. allowing them to procreate and produce sons in his image. Now, let's look at this word for image here. The word zelim. It's rendered image. This is pretty interesting because it's also called a shade or a shadow, a resemblance. And if you read that outside of context, then it seems that it's kind of inferring that Adam would become a shadow of or a lesser light. If Yahweh is light, if Elohim is light, and I'm going to create Adam as a shade or a shadow, then he doesn't have quite as much light as Elohim. Isn't that right? That's what it seems to believe. Seems to lead me to believe. But if you go back and look at what the word literally means, again, understanding that the nouns come from their verbal counterpart, in this instance, zelim is a noun. So what would the verbal counterpart of zelim indicate? If you look at the numbers of variants of that zadi lamed root, it indicates to spread, to extend, to become a covering. So Adam was supposed to take the light and spread it, to extend it, to become a covering of light. Not that it would cover over it and hide it where it wouldn't have the same illuminating capacity, but literally to take that light and disseminate it in the earth. But it's interesting that Zadi Lamed root conveys with it the idea of something that has a ring to it, like a bell. When you hit a bell with a knocker or a hammer or something of that sort, it has a tone. That tone has a specific frequency. It vibrates. It creates a waving motion, and it causes it to tingle or vibrate the ear. Now, when I saw that, I thought, my goodness, that sounds like a man's eardrum, because a man's eardrum vibrates, and when that eardrum vibrates, it passes the frequency of whatever is being heard. What was it that Yeshua said more often than any other phrase? Let he that hath an ear to hear, hear. And so it indicates that not only do I need to expand my ability to hear, but to qualify what I'm hearing. Hearing implies the ability to either to censor the seed, to set up a doorway to prevent certain seed from coming in and allow certain other types of seed to come in. Again, seed, word, light being synonymous. Now, when it passes through and touches the eardrum of the man's ear, it takes those same frequencies and passes them to the three bones inside your ear, the incus, malleus, and stapes, and it causes those three bones in your ear to begin to vibrate. Now I thought, now isn't that something? Because the word for bones is etzim. It's the same word for trees. And so it indicates that there's something regarding these etzim. What I hear becomes the tree of life, or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. As I began to look at this for just a little bit, there's a phenomenon called bone conduction. You can actually hear and understand without it necessarily having to pass through the eardrum. You can actually hear and feel and sense vibrations in your skull. Go back and study Johann Sebastian Bach. The man was almost completely deaf. What he would do, he would take, I believe it was, I forget what the instrument was, but he would put it in his mouth between his jaw. And he would play a note, and that note would touch whatever that was in his mouth, and because of the vibrations and the intonations that he was feeling in his jawbones, it caused him to be able to hear and sense the musical tones, waves, and frequencies that he could not hear otherwise. And I thought, isn't that amazing? Now, again, Yeshua said, if any man have an ear to hear, let him hear. Why is hearing so important? Hearing is related to speaking. You cannot separate the two. There's no sense in me being able to hear if someone's not speaking, or like vice versa. That's why hearing and speaking are so intricately connected. A person that can't hear has a difficult time speaking. Now, if this is the case, you go back and just ask yourself about the times that we have to spend worshiping Elohim. And again, you can't separate what we're talking about from the calendar. These divine appointments were specifically set aside at specific rehearsals, patterns, cyclical, for us to worship Elohim. And I believe so that he could speak, release into us, and we would hear it, and then we would repeat it. And that when you repeat it, the highest form of praise, you need to understand, the highest form of praise is to say what he says about the circumstance or the situation. And it's an established fact that worship has a specific neurophysiological effect on the human body because it releases dopamine in the central nervous system. When that happens, it affects memory in the limbic system, which also has an effect on your heart rate. So when you worship, you're actually producing healing in your own body. And the reason that's important is because when you worship, what are you doing? You're respirating, you're breathing, you're speaking his word. And it's my opinion that the Hebrew language was originally intended to be sung. Every Hebrew letter is a musical note. And if that's the case, when I'm worshiping, it's the purest form of speaking, breathing the worship of Elohim. And when you engage in worship at these set apart times, again, according to the 360-day creation covenant calendar, it seems that this is the method that Yahweh is using to restore his people to our former Edenic condition. And I believe that our words are about to begin to release the light of his word into the darkness that is about to descend. Listen to me, darkness that like has never been seen. There is going to be once again a tohu vabohu condition on this earth, comparable to what we saw in Genesis chapter 1. And you are charged, those of us that are hearing this are charged with making the declaration, let light be here. Now, when I say that, I want you to have light where you're at. I love you. But I want it to be here, right here where I'm at as well. And so we have to get to the point where we can begin to make that declaration. And let me show you what Yahweh says regarding just one of those holy convocations in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 20. Go back and read that in context. And it's talking about curses that will fall on the people that don't keep the Festival of Tabernacles. And I believe that it's going to be based on a 360-day cycle. It says this. Again, you're going to see some mistranslations. In that day shall there be upon the bells. Remember, we talked about the Zadi Lamed root, a ringing a bell. Upon the bells of the horses is the way it reads in the King James English. But that word is mekzila, and it actually indicates a tingling or a vibration of the ears. Now, why would Yahweh write holiness unto Yahweh upon a horse? Well, the word for horse here is a bad translation. It's translated as the word sus, usually rendered horse, but the original intent of this word is to skip for joy, to dance, to shout, to skip for joy. And it's my opinion that what this verse should have said is that in that day it shall come to pass upon the tingling and vibration of our ears, that means we've heard the voice of Yahweh, that there will be a shout and a skipping for joy, a holiness of Yahweh upon his body. And then it says, and the pots in Yahweh's house shall be like the bowls of the altar. When you read that, that's mundane, religious temple service. But it's actually a euphemism that's telling you the common people are going to be as sanctified as the priesthood, holy unto Yahweh. Why? Because there's a tingling of the ears coming. And when with that tingling of the ears comes, we will hear the word of Elohim, and we will be raised up. The Adam, when it talks about the body come together collectively in this earth from the four corners, just like what we're seeing right now in this Zoom meeting, this is a minute description of this body coming together. When this body begins to come together collectively, that's the Adam. That's the Messiah. And that Adam is going to have the ability to speak his word. And people say, oh, man, that's almost blasphemy. Well, it tells me in the book of, Hebrews, that he is standing at the right hand of the Father, waiting until his enemies are subjugated, till his enemies are made his footstool. Well, if he's standing there beside the Father, who's subjugating the enemies? It has to be his people. Being fruitful, multiplying, replenishing, subduing, and having dominion. Amen. I hope that I was able to make myself clear, and you guys take those notes if you have them, and let me know what you think. But I'm just blown away. I'm convinced that there's a unique anointing on you guys and those that have ears to hear with. And again, that's the thing that our Messiah said more often than any other. Let he that hath an ear to hear. Not everybody's hearing. And I'm not saying they don't love Abba. I can't explain it. I can't answer for them. But I am grateful that I have hearing ears. Amen.
Hallelujah. Thank you so much, Pastor David. I'm nearly speechless, to be honest, with what you have presented. Absolutely incredible. I got to look at this a few more times. I really do, to get a lot out of it, or to get more out of it. I scratched the surface, Pastor David. Your first part just exponentially underscored my next presentation coming up. I'm blown away. Wow. And you're speaking about this the bone sound transmission, how it is, but that at the wee hours of this morning, I looked at that information on an advertisement just this morning. Why is that? I don't know, but wow.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What about Ezekiel 37? Bones coming together with its bone. And I believe that this is what's happening. The body is being formed as that sound conduction is touching each one of the bones of the body Messiah, reverberating and causing those bones to begin to form together collectively. And when they stood up, the prophet said, they're not finished yet. And he said, prophesy, speak to the wind, let the breath come. And that's coming, you guys.